There are a lot of things that changed from the apartheid system, especially the laws that can also allow me to move around, because we had laws that restricted black people not to move anywhere. Like, for instance, I'm in the suburbs right now. I would have needed a permit to come to the place. Well, initially, before Soweto was established, people used to live in Johannesburg as mixed races. But through the government not liking to see mixed races, so they wanted to remove Africans, black Africans, away from Johannesburg, because the white population was becoming overwhelmed by the blacks. So they had to move black people in 1904, and they dumped them in an area which used to be a farm in the township. And through a scapegoat, because there was a disease that broke out in 1904 called the bubonic plague. So that's why they moved Africans forcefully from the places that they lived in Johannesburg, and then dumped into the place. That is how Soweto was established. It was just an informal place. Yeah, Soweto is one of the greatest townships. It's the biggest in Africa, and it's got a very rich history, of struggle history, because that is where Mandela, our former president, also used to live, and we also have the current president who also lived in the township. So the history of South Africa, even apartheid, June 16, is also traced from the township. So that's the township that played a very big role in South Africa's democracy. That is why today we have the Vilakazi Street, the only street that has two former Nobel Prize winners. And some of the struggle heroes or heroines, they also come from the township. There is another party apart from the ruling party, not only the ANC, it's a breakup party called the PAC, the Pan-African Congress. Also their leader also lived in the township. So the township is very rich. We do have other heroes from other townships, but not as compared to Soweto.
Actually, this house, it was Nelson Mandela's house since 1946. So Nelson Mandela stayed in this house for 15 years before he went to prison. Then after he came back from prison, he only stayed in this house for only 11 days. But now the house, they've turned the house into a museum. So this house, it was donated to the Soweto Heritage Trust during the mid-90s, so that people can start visiting the house. They can start seeing how Nelson Mandela used to live. Yes. So this house, it's now a museum for the whole public, everyone from all over the world. Mama Winnie and Nelson Mandela, they're very important to the whole of South Africa, because they did a difference to the community. They are the ones who fought for the country. They are the ones who fought for the country. They fought for our country. They were the ones who were part of the struggle. So those two people in our lives, they're very, very important, because they made a difference in our lives.
So this apartheid museum was built for 80 million rands by Gold Reef City, and this is the one that whenever we take people around, but it can tell the whole story, because if you see the pictures, because the picture cannot lie. I can tell you whatever, but the pictures inside are the ones, because you see even people's emotions, especially when you're watching that short film there, you can see how people used to live and how people behave today, because it shows different parts of our history. Yes, that is why they say history is so important to learn where you come from, so that you know where you're going. Like, for instance, today in South Africa, we know that we're oppressed, but because we're Africans, we don't want to oppress other people. It's not that now that we're free or we're ruling, so that we want to oppress other people. So we've learned from our mistake of the past government. So that is why now we say never and never again what happened to be done in the future.
Robben Island is the site which got separated from the mainland, which is today about 7.5 kilometers. For over centuries, it has been used as the place of banishment, place of punishment, place of imprisonment, place to exile people who were resisting a colonial rule from different periods, being Dutch, Portuguese, and up to English. There were prisoners who came from different organizations. The likes of late Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe was the member of the Pan-Africanist Congress who led the march against passes, which resulted for Robben Island to be opened as the prison for political imprisonment. So a huge number of activists were sent here, including Mr. Nelson Mandela, who was the leader and an influencer in the ANC, African National Congress, and who served 18 years of his 27 years in prison. And Jeff Masomola, who spent 30 years in prison, was the longest serving prisoner one time. And Toivo Jatoivo was the leader of SWAPO, Southwest Africa People's Organization in Namibia. He was also here, and some of the inmates from Namibia were also held on this island as prisoners. So many other prisoners were held in the maximum security prison. Robben Island today, it is a living museum, and we do different tours to people who are coming from all walks of life. But during prison time, prisoners had a slogan that Robben Island is a place of critical debate and lifelong learning, and you are trying to continue with that as the museum. And also, it is a platform for South Africans as the nation-building kind of museum. So that is why it is very important for us as the museum to make sure that the stories that we share with people are authentic and are the stories that you are able to tell the truth about what had happened on this island.
Well, I was part of a student movement in Soweto, and also a youth movement called Soweto Youth Congress. And I was a member of the African National Congress, ANC. I served in its military armed wing called Umkhonto Wesizwe when I was based in exile, and we were arrested in a place called Secunda and brought to Johannesburg and put on trial, charged with treason and sentenced to 25 years, and I spent 7 years in this prison from 84 to 91. Mandela was the embodiment of what is good about people. Mandela was somebody that you knew that you've got a good person in your corner. They will never let you down, you know. And Mandela was also a very humble person who treated people the same and never pretended to be whatever he was not. And that was what was unique about this man. P.W. Botha realized that Mandela was sick. And you'll understand, if Mandela dies, there's a revolution in South Africa. This country will burn. So he thought he should release Mandela, and Mandela said, I'm not going anywhere without other political prisoners. And that's how we released. So I will always be grateful to Mandela for my early release.
Constitution Hill, which is a heritage site, a historical site, also was formerly a prison where the incarcerated prisoners according to the color of their skin. So an older prison being the 1892 Old Fort Prison, where they imprisoned the white male prisoners, and then a 1904 prison known as the number 4 prison, where they imprisoned non-white male prisoners. So non-whites being the Asians, blacks, and the coloreds. So they were kept in 2 separate prisons. This is because of the racial segregation happening back then in South Africa. Also having the women's jail built in 1910, housing both races but in separate sections. So a section for non-white female prisoners and a section for white female prisoners. However, many of these prisoners were politicians, also some were those who were found in mixed marriages, those who were also just taken to prison because of the color of their skin. Now also in Constitution Hill we cover the dehumanization process and also the humiliating activities that were actually acted upon the black prisoners, Indian prisoners, and also Asian prisoners, irrespective of gender. So first of all, with Mahatma Gandhi being the first icon here in 1908, between 1908 and 1913. So Mahatma Gandhi was imprisoned here because he was fighting against the Apartheid regime and also considered to be the first Indian to become rebellious against the white laws. Secondly, with Nelson Mandela was also considered to be a politician who is highly influential, so also considered to be a terrorist. Now, as a black politician and also being considered a terrorist, you were not given any privileges in prison. You would be taken into isolation instantly, and that's what would happen with Nelson Mandela. He was taken into the prison in 1962. However, he was the only black prisoner to be kept in the white male prison because officials fear that he might influence the other prisoners inside the non-white male section known as number 4. And then we have Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe. Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe was taken to prison in 1960. This was because he was leading the PAC march. So the PAC march was the Pan-African Congress march, marching against the past system. So the past system was known as the Dom Pass that blacks needed to carry for them to access the city. So he treated them like slaves. So as the leader of the organization, he was taken to prison and also sentenced to 6 years in prison isolation. So the most important part about actually visiting the past is not just visiting the past on paper, it's also visiting the past in physical. So meaning that you can get to see where the atrocities happened, you can get to actually know the stories and relate with the fact that these things happened in the same space that you are standing on. So if you look at the Constitutional Court itself, it's built within a space where human rights were once violated. But today, having the court over here, this is where human rights are protected. So it's to actually make sure that people learn about the past, learn about everything that happened, but also see it physically, and to also know that these things were not supposed to happen in the first place, but also should not happen ever again. Having the Constitutional Court here as the court that protects our human rights, it means that this is our beacon of hope after a past that we've had, a past of dehumanization, humiliation, racialism, and also discrimination.